Okay, I'm a practicing architect, and I've been through the same modernist architectural education as everybody else. And I was also actually quite convinced modernist architect, I would say, quite far into working life after architecture studies. I would like to talk today about, for me it was a very long process of breaking out of modernist thinking. And I will introduce to you today one thing that was perhaps the most, singular, most important thing that gave me this freedom. Last week we talked about, on Friday, we talked about the power of language, how modernist architecture has managed to establish itself and maintain the dominant position for 100 years through the use of language and rhetorics. And it's a difficult discussion to, just have word against word. So my ambition today is to give at least one thing from, one hard fact from science that supports criticism of modernist architecture. What you see here is lightning, or it could also be roots of a tree, or rivers in a drainage basin. You see lines breaking off at some point, and it breaks off again, and breaks off again, so it becomes increasingly detailed. And this is the phenomenon of fractals in mathematics and also in nature. This can be the degree to which this line, or the speed, how fast it breaks off into another line, can be quantified in something called a fractal dimension, which is a number from 1 to 2. It's always between 1 and 2, where 1 is a line that never breaks, it's just straight, or it can be objects that are exactly the same size, whereas 2 represents infinite change, right? So it's a line that breaks so often that it just fills the whole space, or objects that are infinitely smaller than the previous one. And this is everywhere in nature, something between 1 and 2. What you see in the bottom here is the underside of a cloud. It can also be treetops of a forest. It can be surface of a rock. And scientists have studied, or mathematicians have studied fractals in nature and found that it's surprisingly, there's a surprising tendency towards fractals being in the range of 1.3 to 1.5, everywhere, from molecules to planetary systems. There's the same physiological, geological, biological processes that govern nature, and you will find that, tendency everywhere. So nature is inherently rugged or bumpy, right? It's very seldom straight. And scientists have also studied human perception of fractals. Are there any fractals that are, more pleasant to look at than others? And there are. I've studied neuroscience, so that's sort of my background here today. There's environmental psychology on one side, and there's neuroscience on the other. You can ask people what they like. That's one method. You can also use a lot of methods like, scan the pupil dilatation, skin conductance, heart rate, brain imaging. There are so many tools to determine the experience of pleasure. And scientists have found that the fractal dimension it's most comfortable for people, that generates pleasure in people, is between 1.3 and 1.5. Which is not a big surprise, right? Because we are, through evolution, adapted to functioning well in this environment. So it's only natural that that's what we find, beautiful. And this you can also do with, any kind of built or natural environment. You can do an image digital image analysis of any scene or any environment, and determine, you quantify the fractal dimension of that scene or environment. And scientists have studied non-modernist architecture across time and place, and look what they found, that, well, they have fractal dimensions that are also around 1.3 to 1.5. It's also not a surprise, because that's how the evolution of architecture has been, right? So it says non-modernist architecture, because modernist architecture will be like closer to 1, which is, entropy, or, lack of energy. So when we go to architecture from nature, we don't have the same biological and geological processes that just generates what is beautiful. We have to create it, by hand, and we need to be practical, because we have tools. Even industrial or pre-industrial, it always ends up being a little bit straight, and we need to create this beauty that comes naturally in nature. So basically his history of architecture is an evolution in how to mimic the ruggedness and bumpiness of nature, and the structure and the hierarchy that you find in nature, in a way in architecture that's also possible to build and with hands, and it's fits with the society of that time and whatever it needs also to comply with. So like this building here, typically you can see it's divided into 3, and then the wall is maybe divided into window and not window, and maybe columns, and then the window is then subdivided into smaller parts, and then all the way down to the screws. And there's like a great hierarchy of details from the screws to the roof, right? And everything is organized details on many levels. And whereas fractals in nature, at least theoretically, are in indefinite scales, typically in traditional buildings there will be maybe around 7 scales, because that's what, building 100 levels of details is just too expensive. 7 is what you need, or 5 or something. And when people say that, okay, maybe Villa Savoye by Corbusier is designed by Golden Section or something, it's correct. You have 1 level of scale. It's the height versus compared to the width or something, but that stops there, right? There's nothing more after that. There's a substantial research in especially environmental psychology, also neuroscience, the last 30, 40 years, which is just ignored by architectural community. One of the heavyweights is Arthur Stamps, who, this is a very short presentation, summarizes his findings that people enjoy, people's pleasure, it's more or less what I said, people's pleasure in looking at buildings or environments increase with increased complexity of silhouettes of objects and buildings. So the more twists and turns there are in the silhouettes of buildings and subcomponents of buildings, the more pleasure, right? So there it is. The more, the better. Or to put it another way, less is not more. Less is maybe just less. Another heavyweight is Kaplan and Kaplan. There are books on these people you can look up later, whose research has been summarized by the Norwegian environmental psychologist Einar Stromsø as being conceptualized as understand and explore. That all these levels of fractals or details allow you to understand what you're looking at and to explore it. So yeah, you can see there is a roof on this building, then it relates to the sky, it relates to the top of the trees, you know where you are in the world compared to stuff on the ground where there's an entrance door and stuff that relates to the street. So that way you find your way in the world, and you can You can understand your surroundings and feel safe. And modernist architecture is the opposite of this. You know, the whole point of modernist architecture is abstraction. A roof should not be a roof. A balcony should not be a balcony. It should be just abstract form. And the whole point is that you should not easily understand that it's a balcony. It should be an abstract experience of form. So we can see it also in these everyday objects, all the stuff you get for Christmas, these square pepper grinders that you don't know how to put the pepper in or out of this thing, or the soap dispenser you got for Christmas the year before that, where you don't know where to put the soap into it or get it out of it. These are like over-designed objects based on these ideas of abstract form. The object is not telling you how it works, how you put pepper on the food. So I just wanted to use this facade and run through how does it look like when we just strip off these useless, unfunctional fractals. So let's take away the cake decoration. It looks like this. We can take away the mullions in the windows, so we have a better view of the modernist building across the street. We can take away the roof eaves or the extension beyond the facade, because why would you prevent rainwater from running down the facade and grow into fungus around the windows? That's the expression of our times, fungus around the windows. And, material on the roof should be the same as on the wall, because it should be one abstract form, and you should be able to see all the bird shit on the roof. That's honest, right? Architects have been very good at accepting irrefutable scientific evidence of climate change and adapting that into architecture quite strongly. I urge the same architects to accept irrefutable scientific evidence of universal human preferences in architecture, and with that, embrace the function of ornament. And this can take many forms. I think that the only responsible action based on this is to start copying. Let's just say that modernism was an experiment. Okay, that's fine. There were some good things and quite some bad things. We're done with that. Let's just go back to whatever was before modernist architecture, and let's just start copying that. That would be the most responsible thing to do from any other perspective. If you go into other fields of in society, nutrition or car safety, I don't know, anything. If you fail, you go back to where you were before, and you just say, okay, well, that was an experiment. So yeah, let's start copying architecture from before modernism. That's the only reasonable thing to do, I think. But it could, also take new forms. Our society today is, of course, also different in many good ways than compared to 19th century or before. So by copying something old, you don't need to force it. Things will become different anyway. It's, any time in architectural history where people have at some point thought, okay, this is bad, let's go back to whatever was so, much better before. In a way, they always failed because they always put themselves into the copying. There was also always something contemporary that made that into something new in that sense. And that will happen now also. Modernist architects always say that it's a pity to, leave behind the freedom, design freedom of modernist architecture and go back to copying and because traditions are so rigid and fixed, it's not creative. But I think it's completely the other way around. After I've managed to break free from modernist thinking, I only experience freedom, a new freedom of design. You can really do what you want, anything. Thank you.